This video is sponsored by ExpressVPN. The scariest thing to be is alive. On a good day we can talk that out, call it debatable, but in Charlie Kaufman's long-awaited I'm thinking of ending things, that's a statement that can't necessarily be argued against. I'm Thinking of Ending Things is a film based on the book by Ian Reid under the same title. It's about a young woman traveling with her new boyfriend to his parents' secluded farm, or at least that's where we'll start. If there's one practically guaranteed feeling that I've seen people have after watching this, it's confusion. Which is to be expected with Kaufman most of the time, whether it's something he directed or something he wrote. His films work like puzzles consisting of different pieces that all in some way mean something, but are intentionally scattered. I still don't think there's a Charlie Kaufman film that I thoroughly understand 100%, but I think I'm still allowed to say I love and am consistently fascinated by what he brings to the table. This one delivering that in a pretty literal sense. While there's already a dark twist within the film that I'll explain in a second, there's also a horror to it that is universal and, unlike a lot of what comes out of the horror genre, inescapable. I'd like to make it clear that this is my take on the film. I'm sure there are plenty of others out there that are just as interesting, and also there are obviously going to be spoilers. To anyone who has read the book, this is much more obvious, but for anyone unaware after watching the movie, Jessie Buckley's character, who doesn't seem to have one singular name and is credited as a young woman, is not real, but instead a fantasy coming from Jake, played by Jesse Plemons. What is presented as a road trip movie, if you can call it that, is instead just a fantasy inside of the head of not that Jake, but that Jake, the janitor working at this high school. The film on its surface recounts this couple driving to meet these parents, but throughout the trip, Jessie Buckley is contemplating ending things. It's implied she means breaking up, but from what I know, that's never specifically said. But throughout, scenes of this old janitor cleaning the floors of a high school are interspersed. It isn't until this couple and this janitor end up in the same building that a lot of the pieces come together, and it's realized that this was never a real relationship to begin with. The entire film, or this relationship, is happening within this janitor's head. It's a story of him recounting regrets, hypotheticals, loved ones, and his entire life moments before he dies. So I've seen the film twice now, and one of the many fascinating parts about it is how different that first and second viewing are, yet how equally impactful they both are. On the first viewing, one of the main themes of the film is already pretty clear, a mixture of time and aging. I would say the clear thesis of the film is revealed here.
People like to think of themselves as points moving through time, but I think it's probably the opposite. We're stationary, and time passes through us.
It's in those few lines that you recognize what appears to be the main internal conflict of the film, time. I mean, he's not a great boyfriend so far, but he's less of a villain compared to the Win Buckley speaks of. Kaufman is depicting the fear of unstoppable time, not just through moments like that, but through other subtleties, one of my personal favorites being his use of food. There are 3 moments with food in the film, one of them at the dinner table, the second being the Yule log, and the third being the ice cream. In all 3 cases, time has an effect on how the characters are able to enjoy the food. At the dinner table, all the food gets cold and nobody ends up eating any of it. With the Yule log, it's made clear that Yule was months ago, and while they still can eat it, it's outdated. And for the ice cream, it's ice cream. After not too long, it begins to melt, prompting them to need to throw the cups away. It sounds silly to read so much into just food, especially when the ice cream is mostly a plot device to get them to throw the cups away at the school, but food is a small-scale example of aging done at a short period of time. Throughout the film, the characters are reminded of the immortality of everything around them, like the farm animals, the authors they like, their own food, even their memories. There's a terrifying idea that Kaufman places at the end of Synecdoche, New York, which I won't spoil for anyone who hasn't seen it, but corresponds pretty well with the horror he attempts to depict in I'm Thinking of Ending Things. With memories that fade and often die off within days, and descriptions of people we know and love fading out of our minds without our control, Kaufman suggests what makes us who we are when we die. You're, in a sense, a product of everything you've experienced and latched onto, so what does it mean to lose those memories by the end of your life? It's thoughts like this that make something like dementia, something that Jake's father appears to experience near the end of his life, such a terrifying idea. If you have no memories, nothing to define yourself with, what are you when you die? Tarkovsky does this really well in his film Mirror, but he approaches it in a much more beautiful way. Kaufman's approach is terrifying. All of this comes together at a much more powerful level, the the second time you watch the film. The film ends with the realization that the janitor was Jake all along, but more importantly, that everything has been a fantasy. When you look at the film from that lens, everything starts to make a hell of a lot more sense. I mean, seriously, if you haven't watched the film a second time, please do so, it's a ton of fun. Starting from the beginning, you look at Buckley's character less as this original character and more as a made-up being. Same goes for Jake in a way, considering this wasn't what Jake was actually like. You realize the actual conflict isn't the parents or the boyfriend or even really time. I'd argue the janitor / Jake aren't even the main characters despite being the anchors of the film. This is a movie about a fantasy, realizing she's a fantasy and trying to escape and understand her own existence. This is pretty obvious for a lot of people who read the book, and I'm sure tons of people picked up on this the first viewing. It's a very cool idea and concept for a horror film that Kaufman hides really well, but is in plain sight once you notice it. And this is when we start tying into one of my favorite aspects of the film, how it looks at all forms of media. It offers something to this conversation of identity at death that Tarkovsky was too ahead of his time to fully capture. This film is littered with references to all sorts of media: poetry, movies, songs, monologues, books, even reviews. While definitely intimidating at first, the magic of this film is that you as the viewer don't have to have seen or read all of these references to necessarily understand their purpose here. One, because whatever Kaufman chooses to highlight from said reference usually is used as a supportive argument for what he's trying to tell at any given time, but also the very existence of these references being in the work adds to the argument that the film is trying to make, that argument being that you are defined by the media you consume, which I think is a great addition to this conversation of identity and also a subtle jab at how society / the industry produces art and media, which is something Kaufman has actually spoken about in the past.
People all over the world spend countless hours of their lives every week being fed entertainment in the forms of movies, TV shows, newspapers, YouTube videos, the internet. And it's ludicrous to believe that this stuff doesn't alter our brains.
Art isn't something that holds the immortality that it does because you can physically preserve it for centuries. It holds that power because it acts as a piece of people. If you love Inception, for example, and it's something that heavily influenced you in whatever way, Inception can be considered part of your psyche, and that's something that can live on forever. Kaufman takes it one step further in a few different ways. For one, he suggests that this also applies to how other people view the art that you like, and how someone else's opinion on a piece of art you love can stay with you and attach itself out of your control. This of course happens when Jessie Buckley breaks into a Gina Rowland impression while quoting the review for A Woman Under the Influence by Pauline Kael. There's a lot happening in that scene that we could talk about for a while, but to include that as something a janitor has in his fantasy is fascinating to me. It also suggests that Kaufman looks at film criticism as an art form in itself, which I can appreciate. Secondly, he acknowledges how the media distorts your worldview. This idea is planted way earlier in the film and finds itself in some way, shape, or form in every scene afterwards. In these shots of Jake's childhood bedroom, you see movies, books, you name it. These all make their ways into the fantasy, the film, suggesting your view of the world is based entirely on the media that you consume. Even something like The Thing, which is never explicitly mentioned by any character, makes its way in because, I mean, they are in the middle of an awful blizzard. I just eat details like that up. But back to what I was saying, I mean, think about it. Your conscience probably speaks in a certain rhythm because of what you watch or read. This even brings up a separate idea with dreams and how they always have a certain cinematic quality to them. How you view everything in your head is based on the rhythm you're used to in movies, which implies how we dreamt prior to the invention of photography and how it's pretty mysterious. That's a different video entirely. Lastly, he uses art to talk about one's own work, which happens in the film's most nauseating scene in my opinion. When Jessie Buckley finally goes down to the basement, she finds a series of paintings with Jake's name on them. The thing is that these paintings were the same ones that she claimed as her own when she shared them at the dinner table just a few moments earlier. She checks her phone to find that she has no photos at all and realizes that those paintings were never hers and have been Jake's all along. In fact, nothing was ever hers, not even herself. It's here where the existential crisis kicks in and she begins to contemplate who she is, where she is, and if she even exists at all. While Jessie Buckley is a fictional character, the familiarity that Kaufman has built within this premise is what makes this moment so terrifying. Because there's nothing that necessarily proves this is a fictional idea. You could argue it's not fictional at all. Your influence, your work, what you bring to the world at the end of the day is a product of someone else's doing. You are never completely unique. Everything is a product of everything. As mentioned in Synecdoche, New York, everyone is everyone. Synecdoche, New York, on the other hand, offers hope or at least a sense of comfort that because everyone is everyone, everyone is in the same boat. But I'm Thinking of Ending Things offers a much darker, much more claustrophobic look at this philosophy, but equally as truthful. There's one question I've been trying to figure out myself and work around since watching the movie, and it's, what does it mean that your fantasy wanting to end things means you want to end things? Because if we strip away all the hints and the revelations and the extra meat, that's the decision that really gives the film a reason to exist. The janitor is thinking of ending things because the fantasy is as well. The fantasy to this janitor represents something pretty unhealthy, in my opinion, in that it prevents him from mentally moving forward. Similar to the car ride, he himself is moving because of time, but there's nothing to look at. It's the same snow, the same landscapes, the same patterns on the wallpaper, the same farms. I mean, after all, it is when the young girl at the ice cream shop suggests not moving forward that the film really starts to come to a close. If we're looking at the drive as time moving forward and they stop driving, that's to say that time is also stopping. This is to say that the janitor wants to end things, and the only option he has is to end things because he has nowhere to go. The road that is his life has been snowed over, impossible to travel on. His past is his present, and a future does not exist for him anymore. Which is why I think the scariest thing to be is alive is the centerpiece to this film. While sure they may not be perfect people and have their own issues that can be fixed, the overarching conflict wasn't time at all. It wasn't a bad relationship, it wasn't depression or family or sex, it was just existing. It was hyper self-awareness that killed the fantasy, which suggests that there was always a problem all along. And if we're saying that, that's to suggest that the horror of I'm thinking of ending things is thinking itself.
Have you ever wanted to watch a movie and realize that it isn't available in your country? Well, with ExpressVPN, you can cheat the system, stream that movie, and browse the internet safely at the same damn time. When you're doing quite literally anything online, you're sending a lot of data that's able to be seen by different parties before it reaches that final destination. It's creepy, it's terrible, nobody likes it, but if you want to avoid that and browse the web safely, let me introduce you to ExpressVPN. A VPN, a virtual private network, reroutes your connection through encrypted servers to keep that information private. I've tried a few different services over the years, and none do it as securely and as professionally as ExpressVPN. What I love about it is that you can connect to any region in the world that you want. I really wanted to watch Impractical Jokers on Netflix, but it wasn't available in the US, so I was able to connect to Canadian Netflix, and boom, I'm having a laugh. The term geo-restricted? Never heard of it. You can find out how to get 3 months free of ExpressVPN by clicking the link in the description or by going to expressvpn.com/Karsten.